Very much for that introduction, and hello to everyone watching the live stream as well. First of all, I would just like to say thank you very much for inviting me to your beautiful country, Iceland. It's very nice to be here, despite the very dramatic circumstances you have here ongoing in the town of Grindavik. I work at the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. I almost need to sort of look at the title to remember it in English. And I work in the Department for Working Life and Skills as a Senior Advisor. I'm here today to share with you some of the current developments going on in Norway. I'm going to talk about three parallel processes happening at the same time that are slightly separate but at the same time related to each other. And of course all of this is in the context of adult education provision and some quite major changes taking place in that area. We have a new completion reform and a new Education Act happening in 2024. Validation of prior learning, current systems are not sufficient to increase the capacity that we see is necessary. That is relevant to all the levels in our education system. And I also want to give you an example today of an initiative that's funded by the government, and that is quite a big program we're running that is very successful. And that's developing flexible and continuing education and opportunities for people in the working life. And that's called the Trade and Industry Program. First of all, I just want to give you a sort of a little backdrop to our current situation and what sort of the driving forces behind some of these changes we see as very necessary. We have a major and persistent skill shortage in many sectors in Norway. Some are really quite sort of urgent and red flags. We're a population of, we're about 5.5 million people in Norway now. This figure, 576,000 people, I mean, that number is people within the age group of 25 to 65, so within the age group of those that, you know, ideally would participate in working life, that have not completed upper secondary education. And we have, you know, more and more solid evidence that shows the consequences of not having completed your upper secondary education in Norway. Almost half the people that are sort of outside of work and outside of the education system have not completed the upper secondary certificate. And of course, like many other countries as well, there are these sort of major underlying drivers like, you know, demographics, digitalization, the green transition, and geopolitics that are really sort of all separately and combined affecting how we plan and prepare for the rapid changes. You know, we have 1,000 people arriving from the Ukraine every week now in Norway. And, you know, it's the local municipalities, the county municipalities that has to provide and facilitate nursery places, education, etc. So there really is a sort of, you know, lots of urgent issues we need to address. So we need a massive need for new skills, reskilling and upskilling. And because the demographics shows that already from 2025, the number of young people entering higher education, you know, becoming adults is significantly reducing. We need to look at how we mobilize and use our existing workforce, i.e. addressing our adult provision. So I'll start off by saying a little bit about the completion reform and our revised Education Act and why the need for this. Because the last reform in this system was back in 1994, which is a long time ago now. And really, we're seeing far too high dropout rates, especially in vet provision, very low motivation, outdated ways of teaching and curriculums. And most importantly, for this context, the way and methods that adult provision is sort of taken care of is just not adapted to the adults' needs at all. And in Norway, we have the same legislation. So this picture here, the ny opplæringslov 2024. In Norway, we have the same legislative framework for young people and for adults. And that has been some of the problems that has been addressed in this new Education Act, where the adult provision is dealt with separately from how young people's provision is looked after. So some of the changes that are taking place is that today there is lots of sort of regulations as to who's entitled to complete their adult education, who's entitled to get access to it. You know, there are lots of sort of requirements to that. So all of that is being removed. Everyone's entitled to free adult education at this upper secondary level, and you can spend as long as you need to complete it. Today, there's a time limit. So if you haven't completed within that time limit, you lose your right and you need to sort of pay for it privately. There is also, because there are so many professions and so many professional fagbrev, as we call them, the fagbrev, that become out of date, or, you know, things are changing so fast in the labor market, people need new fagbrevs. So now there's a new right as well to take a new fagbrev. And as many as you like, really. It's all opening up. No more sort of restrictions. And significantly, there's a whole new way of thinking about adult provision, a whole new way of teaching adults. And that's introducing a modularized curriculum in vocational education and training. And that's really a major sort of shift, and it's taken some time, but it's been a sort of a long battle for a lot of committed people to sort of the whole adult provision sector. And that's really just taking into account that adults have very different needs from young people, both in the way we learn and how we live our lives. You know, life happens, people have children, people have things happening in their lives. That means that they sometimes have to stop, but now sort of getting in and out of the system will not have as big consequences as it has previously. Also, validation of prior learning is sort of the cornerstone, the essential sort of building block of this new model, because it's based on the recognition that all adults have something that needs to be validated and built upon, so that you don't need to sit in sort of old systems where you spend 4 or 5 or longer years in order to complete. I'm not, it's an ongoing lifelong learning issue for me to have less text on slides. So I'm not going to read all of this, but you know, you can look at these slides afterwards for those of you who are interested. But I just wanted to try and sort of set up the sort of the differences between the modularized or the adult version of the upper secondary system and the current one. So in the ordinary system, you know, young people spend 2 years in school where you get all your theoretical subjects and all your theoretical bases, and then you spend 2 years as an apprentice. But the modularized system, you know, it's much more sort of flexible. It's not just based on modules, but you start your learning in working life. And especially for the people in this system who are often immigrants, you know, learning whilst doing, you're placed in the workplace, and it's the teachers that have to come out from the schools and adapt the teaching in your subjects to your practice in the workplace. And that's, you know, this is a sort of ongoing process, you know, but for traditional teachers, you know, this is a huge shift as well. So there's really a major sort of, you know, mindset change that needs to take place here. And of course, the validation of prior learning is then integrated into this model. This, I've just included this in order for you to sort of visualize what this looks like. So modularized, you know, the curricula is broken into smaller modules. Each module, you're given a certificate and a pass. If you drop out and you come back, you just put right back into the system where you are. Validation of prior learning is obviously built into this and very central, because when you're in the workplace, it's easier to do the validation of prior learning as well, because it's easier for the assessors to see what skills and competences you're actually bringing with you. So, you know, this is a sort of big shift in adult education provision at this level. And of course, the final vocational exam, that final exam that leads to you acquiring your fagbrev, is the same in the system for adults and for young people. This new system that is modularized is for everyone from 19 years onwards. The current system draws a line at 25 years, but the new law is from 19 years. So that means that anyone really from 19 onwards can choose which system they want to follow. So having said that, this system is very much based on the whole sort of validation of prior learning systems being in place. In Norway, when we talk about validation of prior learning, we're talking about validation of prior learning. I must start using the VPL. We're talking about that within the formal education systems. We have this very sort of strong belief in Norway that we need to fix our formal education system and adapt the formal system to the needs for those diverse groups that keeps coming into it and make it work better. So validation of prior learning exists within all levels in the formal system. Today I'll focus on, within my time here, the upper secondary system and also higher education. But it's interesting, upper secondary education, I mean, the level below upper secondary education, which is also undergoing some huge changes. Today, validation of prior learning is not something that you're entitled to at that level, but with the new Education Act, they're introducing the right at that level as well. And I also have to say, VPL is something that's becoming more and more into policy in Norway, especially for immigration issues. We see a huge sort of importance being placed on it, which is really very nice for those of us who work with VPL to see it being such, a hot topic in the debate. So in the system of upper secondary education, it's the county municipalities that are responsible and school owners at that level, which also means they have to provide for adult education. So by law, all adults are entitled to education. Those who are entitled to education are also entitled to have a validation of prior learning done. We know from existing research that there are huge issues relating to how the different municipalities implement and practice and organize VPL. So because of that, the Ministry of Education and Research gave us an official assignment that we have worked on this year. We are a working group within the directorate that I'm actually in charge of. And we have conducted 33 interviews with people in all the county municipalities in Norway to really try and get to the bottom of sort of what the main issues are when it comes to sort of, implementing and delivering validation of the system of validation of prior learning. And, in Norway, we're very sort of concerned with the decentralized structure, and there's very different, varied demographics, etc. So everyone's sort of entitled to and should be able to organize it accordingly to how they need to because of all their local conditions. But there is a huge problem in sort of different interpretations and huge variations in how this is currently done. And of course, bearing in mind the new model that's coming into place in August 2024, there is some urgency to be sort of, we need to look at how we create a more sort of efficient and sort of similar practice across all the county municipalities. We also found that there is some lack of clarity of ownership of the system, both at national and local level. And some of that has to do with the fact that, we as a directorate are responsible for sort of developing a lot of systems and organizations. And then there is another directorate that sits with the legislation. So for the various municipalities and county municipalities, those lines of ownership is not always clear. So what happens in terms of that official study is that We are working on the report with all our findings, and we are asked to make some key recommendations to the ministry by the end of this year. And then it's up to the ministry to decide what actions they see necessary to take. But we expect, and we haven't concluded yet, but we see there is a huge need for some major sort of initiatives to be made in order to get the validation of prior learning system rigged to meet all the changes that's happening at this level. I'm moving quickly on to higher education, and the reason why I've chosen the other area, for example, to be higher education is because, as I will talk about next, the trade and industry program, we at the Directorate are getting quite a lot of funding from the ministry to make these programs, to make continuing education and to make flexible programs available for the workforce. So, of course, some of those courses are at universities and higher education colleges. And in Norway, we have by law, you are entitled to have access to university-level education if you are 25 years and you have relevant experience. And this is a system that is implemented in law, and it is something that all the higher education sector should be using. But the numbers are just shockingly low. And, it's obviously a huge problem, and there's lots of funding going into the sector to provide flexible and available courses, but then there is a problem with access for a lot of people. And it is quite bizarre when people sort of in their 40s, 50s, that have 20 years of relevant work experience are not getting access to do these short sort of courses because they don't have the general certificate of upper secondary education from when they were 18. It's like sometimes it's even hard to sort of go back and find those documents, but the sector is very sort of concerned with, looking at your general certificate of upper secondary education, regardless of how many years of work experience you have. So we are leaning on a NOU, which is a sort of norsk offentlig utredning, which I think is a similar word maybe that you have here, which is an official report that we know the Ministry of Education is very concerned with looking at admission system. Like I said, there is a reduction in number of young people entering the system, so we need to look at how to make education at this level available and accessible to people in the workforce as well. So the recommendations of this document was that that this system of access via sort of validation of prior learning must continue, especially to include all those groups that we know need continuing education provision. So the Ministry of Education was advised to look at initiatives that will increase the use of EPL at this level. And of course, in our directorate, we were very happy to hear this recommendation, and we jumped on that, and we have made a proposal and a suggestion to the ministry that they centralize the VPL process at this level and place it within our directorate, because we have a unit in our directorate that is already working on a system of documenting the papers for immigrants that come to Norway who don't have their documents with them, but they have higher education from their home countries. So we have an interview-based unit in our directorate that is actually working to using methods that is very similar to VPL methods. So that's an initiative from us, from our directorate to the ministry. It remains to be seen what will happen, but there is a white paper coming out in the spring. So we're hopeful that some measures will be taken there as well to do this. So the trade and industry programs, these are sectorial programs for lifelong learning in the workplace. And the main goals here is to make educational programs that are flexible enough for people in the workplace to actually complete them. And not just to sort of start and then just see that it's too overwhelming. So to get funding to provide within this trade and industry program, the programs really need to be tailored to suit those in the workplace. All programs, I mean, all courses in this program are free to the users. And in terms of the sort of the providers, you know, the aim here is to give them the sort of seeding money, to give them funds to develop and create these lifelong learning programs. The target group, I'm looking at the time, I'll be quick. The target group for this program is employees, is those who are made redundant, unemployed in industries with a particular need for restructuring. I'm not going to read up all the sectors. You can see all the sectors here that are currently in the program. So they are 3-year programs, 3-year funding is given. We've just had 2 new programs, which is finance and ICT. How are the sector's needs for skills identified? I think this is what's quite interesting with this competency model. So it's the representatives from the industries, the employers' organizations and the confederations of trade unions that act as a steering committee for each of the programs. So they are responsible for identifying the skills, not the education providers. So it's sort of turned around. And then the education providers, they have to secure partnerships with the business community in order to really make the offers that they're developing specific and relevant to the work life, so that it's not the education providers sort of, you know, setting the agenda. It's really sort of turned around. And that makes it's quite a complex model, because this, you know, we act as the secretariat, and I've been in a few of them, so I know it's sometimes quite sort of hard work to do that, but that's the way to sort of ensure that the trade and industry program is really for sort of designed by the workplace itself. It has been evaluated, and the results are quite good. The tri-party cooperation has worked, and the needs of the industries have largely been met. And also, the initial aim of this program was really to reach those with low skills and little access to education. But we see that it's easier to reach those groups when you make sort of flexible programs, you know. And I think the improvements that needs to be made is that, you know, we're spending quite a lot of sort of funding into these programs, but then it's the access issue for those offers in the higher education part of it that we need to address. But also to mobilize for people to participate. I mean, that's actually our current challenge at the moment. So in the last few years, we've developed, and, you know, we've got all these opportunities there, but now really it's to mobilize for people to find the time to participate and to complete. And that was it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth, for this valuable insight. Nú ætlum við að bjóða... nú færum við okkur til Svíþjóðar og heyrum frá Anna Kahlson sem starfar hjá Fagháskólastofnuninni landsins. Anna hefur víðtæka reynslu af símenntun, hæfnivottun, starfsmenntun, fullorðinsfræðslu og raunfærnimati bæði í Svíþjóð og alþjóðavettvangi. Hjá Fagháskólastofnuninni ber Anna ábyrgð á sænska hæfnirammanum og samræmingu hans við evrópska hæfnirammann. Erindi hennar ber heitið skilvirkt og sveigjanlegt framboð á færni í tengslum við umbreytingar og endurmenntun og færniþróun í Svíþjóð. Anna ætlar að vera hérna með okkur á Zoom eða Teams sýnist mér. Anna, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me fine. Yes, good, excellent. My name is Anna Kahlson, and I work at the Swedish National Agency for Higher Vocational Education. I can't really see the room right now, so if there's anyone who, you know, wants to say something or to me to see something, you know, someone have to step in front of the camera, I think. But I will go right ahead and share my presentation. Let's keep our fingers crossed that it's going to be in the right mode. I hope that you can see this now. If you don't, someone will have to come and tell me, good, perfect, I got a thumbs up. Thank you very much for that. So, thank you for inviting me. Unfortunately, I couldn't join you in Reykjavik today. I think it's my loss, but I hope this will suffice to give a presentation like this. And I think you will recognize a lot of what I'm going to be talking about from Elisabeth's presentation, actually, because I could take her sort of backdrop description and use that one for Sweden as well. So I think the challenges we have are quite similar. But I will be talking a little bit about efficient and flexible skills provision for transitions for and upskill and what's going on in regards to that here in Sweden. First, I just wanted to quickly tell you something about who we are. We are an agency under the Ministry of Education and Science. We are not a big agency, but we are in 2 offices in Sweden. And the more interesting thing about us is what are we actually working on. So we are, as the name would imply, responsible for higher vocational education here in Sweden. We are also responsible for some post-secondary arts and culture courses and for some interpretation courses and programs. The thing that I mostly work on are the 2 last ones here, which is the Swedish system for validation of prior learning, where our task is to sort of coordinate the work when it comes to follow-up, developments, knowledge sharing, and so on. And last but not least, we are also responsible for the Swedish National Qualifications Framework, and that's where that's my main responsibility, let's say. So my starting point will be a little bit more coming from a qualifications perspective, let's say. But I'll also start with some of the challenges, and like I said, I think you will recognize this quite a lot. We are actually talking about a skills crisis here in Sweden. I think also the rest of Europe is actually doing that, where we see that we at the same time both have a rather high unemployment rate, but we also have a very high participation rate within the labor market. So that's a bit strange, but we do see that the skills of the unemployed does not match the job openings, more or less. So the people that actually needs to get employed are not the ones that companies are looking for, or they don't have the right skills for what companies are looking for. And this is, of course, a problem where you do need training, reskill and upskill to sort of meet that challenge. We have a lot of work, and I'm sure you've heard about that, but we have some work in Sweden with rather large-scale business or industry establishment, especially in the north of Sweden. You've probably heard a lot about the battery sector, and that there are battery factories opening up outside of, for instance, Skellefteå in the north of Sweden. And that becomes like a mini universe when it comes to these skills challenges, because you have to find people who wants to work in that sector, but that bringing in such a big sector to a rather small town in Sweden means that you also need people in other sectors, like in schools and in healthcare and so on. And then people want to have to move to the north of Sweden, which is also one of the challenges when it comes to this. So it's not only that you need to find people with the needed skills for this, but you also need to find the people. I wanted to give an example when it comes to just the battery sector. Cedefop, the EU agency working on these issues, have estimated that within the next 3 to 6 years, there will be a need of around 800,000 people within the battery sector throughout Europe. 800,000 people, that's quite a large number. And the conclusion is that you need to then work with other ways of training and upskilling people, let's say, to be able to meet that need. What we also see in Sweden that I think is interesting is that we are seeing that fewer 15-year-olds, so when they are leaving general education in Sweden and going into upper secondary, the Swedish gymnasieskola, they are becoming fewer and fewer that actually chooses the vocational education and training pathway. And this is also, of course, problematic. And again, same thing here as in many other countries, that there is a growing need for an upskill to meet the skills need for the green and digital transitions, and so on and so on. And I think the conclusion that we have drawn is that formal education and our school system is not going to be enough to mitigate this skills crisis. So that's a little bit of a backdrop to you. So what are we then doing to try to facilitate more people with the right skills for what's needed? And this is, of course, something that is based on the responsibilities that we as a national agency have. So we often talk about these three, let's say, steps, going from identified skills needs to actually having qualified personnel out in the companies. And I'm going to dive into these steps a little bit more. But I wanted to say that this model is something that we talk about that can be used both at sort of an overarching or more national level when we talk about skill supply. In Sweden, we call it kompetensförsörjning. But this is also a model that you can use and apply on strategic work with skills and competence development within organizations, within companies. But you can also think about this from what individuals actually need. So you need to start with figuring out what the skills that are needed are. And here we can talk a lot about skills intelligence and so on. But I want to highlight and point to the fact that here we all have instruments in our countries that can facilitate this work. And that is our national qualifications framework. And the agreement within the labor market and labor market actors need to be on what are the skills that they actually need. And they need to know that in order to help both the education system and other actors to design skills requirements. And here we can talk about, the qualification frameworks in themselves as a tool for this, but we can also talk about having relevant qualifications. We can talk about job profiles, micro-credentials, as everyone is hearing about as, I think, the new black at the moment. But I would point out that the most important factor in this is that you use the systems that you already have in place. So the national qualification frameworks are key in this. And you need an open and inclusive national qualification framework so that you can also have other qualifications or learning taking place in non-formal in the non-formal contexts can also be included and made comparable and more usable, let's say, through a qualification framework. When you've done that, when you actually know what the skills that you need are, you also need to try to find out what the skills you already have in place are. And while doing that, you also then will learn more about what the skills that are missing, what they are. And here I think that validation of prior learning is one of the keys, but it's not only validation of prior learning. It is about building flexible learning pathways that actually start by identifying and give value to what individuals already actually know and can do. Validation is one tool for that, but there are other tools that need to work in tandem with this. Guidance is extremely important, but also the fact that we need to start rethink how we actually organize training and education. And I think Elisabeth was pointing to that need as well. And you need to have validation systems that work for people that are already employed, because those are the ones that will need to reskill and upskill throughout their lives. And last but not least, we often also then say that, yes, validation, trying to find out and identify what people already have with them and identifying what are the relevant skills that are needed and so on. All of those things are good, but you also need the last sort of step in this. And that is how then do you fill those identified gaps with the skills that are needed. And there are a lot of talk right now about flexible and effective skills provision efforts. And I think, from my point of view, I think the way that we have thought about education and learning and so on, so traditional sort of classroom-based learning, that's not going to be enough. And it's not going to help people that are in the middle of their careers, in the middle of their lives, to actually upskill and reskill. So you need to create these skills provision tools that are tailored to people that perhaps work at the same time as they need to learn more. So I think that's very, very important. And to do that, you need to individualize skills provision a lot more than we have been used to. And I think this is a challenge for many people within the education system, because we are very used to this traditional way of thinking this. But if you have a validation system that is completely built together with the complementary training on filling gaps, that's when you're going to see an effect on this. And I wanted to share with you one of the things that we have been doing here in Sweden in the last couple of years, that within the higher vocational education system, we have run a 3-year pilot as a task from the government to try and build a flexible pathway towards higher vocational degree or qualification, let's say, with the help of validation. So what we did is that we have sort of created a new way of doing that. That's still the same what, but it's a different how. So the qualification and the qualification requirements and the intended learning outcomes for EUFlex is exactly the same as it would be if you would study the same program in, let's say, the traditional or normal way. But we have started in this, we've started with the validation part, and then based on the validation outcome, the result of the validation process, we created individual learning pathways where you only need to fill in the gaps that we have identified to be able to reach the degree. This is nothing new. There are programs and so on that have been doing this before. But what's very interesting in this pilot is that we could see that, first of all, we actually reduced the cost of training these people almost by half. So by doing it this way, we say that we can train 2 for 1. What we also see within this pilot is that we save time. So those people going into this flexible validation-based pathway, they save time. So they reduce a 2-year program to about 1 year of studies on average, and most of them could also work at the same time. And last but not least, the very interesting number in this as well is that on average, these students had about half of the training program validated or exempted, as we would say. So we do know that these students have a lot of knowledge and skills with them going in, and it would be a complete waste of resources to not utilize that. So these 3 steps are what, let's say, our thought model for thinking about what different measures do we need to take to build a more efficient skills provision system in Sweden. So this is what we're trying to do. Clear and relevant qualifications as the basis, then identify, find out, and give value to what people actually already know, and then really targeted complementary training to reach and have, gain the qualification or the skills or whatever that actually is needed in the labor market. And with that said, there's a lot of things going on, And I wanted to mention just a few of the big reforms or work that is actually going on in Sweden right now. First of all, we had, and it's been underway for a year now, a new, it's a labor market law reform that comes with a transition package that the state and the social partners have agreed upon. And we call it omställningsreformen in Swedish. And this means that for people within the middle of their careers, they now have the right to a support and upskill through the collective agreements. And the government part in this is that the government has agreed to support this with a study grant scheme, so student loans, let's say. So people in the middle of their lives now have the right to have a student financing scheme with up to 80% of their salary for up to a year going into these training. So that's quite a big reform. We will have to get back and say more about how it's actually going, but we do know that interest is very high. And the interesting thing, what we've seen after this first year is that it's around the same amount of people going for training within higher education as it is through higher vocational education. So that's quite interesting. We, of course, work with the continued support for those industry sectors who want to work with and develop what we call non-formal qualifications or the non-formal learning pathways that can be included in the Swedish qualification framework. And we see this, as I said, as a very important basis for learning that takes place outside of the formal system, which is also what the sectors really see as a key factor for efficient skills provision. We also have a new validation of prior learning ordinance that clearly links validation in Sweden with the qualification framework. And we do think that this will help support the uptake of validation, both in formal education, but also in working life. And we have something that's called the Technical Support Instrument Project. The Technical Support Instrument is, as you know, an EU-funded support for countries. And this project is implemented by the OECD. And it's a 2-year project that looks on skills governance in Sweden. And we are many different actors involved and many different agencies and so on. So we do think that this is something that's really important to help foster better cooperation and creating better synergies between all the different actors involved in the skills governance system in Sweden. And last but not least, we have since a couple of years something that's actually growing, an interagency skills cooperation. We are, I think, at the moment, 8 different national agencies that are now cooperating on specific issues in relation to skill supply and lifelong learning here in Sweden. So we have an interagency working group on validation. We have one on skills intelligence. We have one on guidance. We have one on mobility tools and so on. So there's a lot of work now going on where we are actually working together. And I think I'm going to end with that as my final point, that when it comes to creating better opportunities for lifelong learning and creating really efficient skills provision in a country, you really have to work together, because there is no one actor who can solve those issues that we all face on their own. So with that, I would like to just thank you for your attention. And even if I didn't see any one of you, I was happy to be here and present this for you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this.